WWE released an original special on their network about Mean Gene Okerlund called "Let Me Tell You Something, Mean Gene." That was probably the worst Hogan impersonation you can get, but they did a special, and they were working on this for a while. I'm not so sure if this was only meant to be a 30-minute documentary, because they had been doing several interviews with several legends about Mean Gene, and I really believe they're probably going to come up with a documentary in DVD form. They rarely do that anymore, but I think it might get something like that, or at the very least a longer documentary on the network. This just seems like a 30-minute documentary just because he passed away and they wanted to do something quick, but I expect maybe later this year a feature documentary DVD special maybe on Mean Gene. So the documentary just starts with a bunch of legends remembering Mean Gene, just quick highlights, and they show some of his most famous interviews before they actually go to where Mean Gene grew up, and they actually have him being interviewed before he passed away. So I think this might actually be the documentary that they had already planned, because if they did this already, it was probably incomplete, but they're probably going to use what they had already filmed with Mean Gene. So he talked about how he started off as a disc jockey, and then that led him into getting an opportunity with the AWA, and he does ring announcing for them. So we're seeing some of his interviews with Bobby Heenan. They show some of Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, and him and Hogan obviously had great chemistry. And Hogan even says that Mean Gene helped him guide him through the interview. Then he talks about how he got the Mean Gene nickname. And it was Jesse the Body Ventura who first called him Mean Gene in an interview. And it was Hogan who really, that Ventura gave him the nickname, but Hogan, made it stick him with everybody. He's the one who would always say, "Well, let me tell you something, Mean Gene." And that's what really got it over as his permanent nickname. And everything changes when Hogan gets the call to go to New York, which at the time meant WWF, and Hogan wants Mean Gene to go with him. They're both going to leave the AWA, and Mean Gene agrees. And the main thing that's different with WWF is Vince McMahon Jr. has taken over. It's going to be a different vision for the company than his father, and the rest is history. And they're really talking about the wrestling boom and everything that led up to the first WrestleMania. They're doing so much celebrity work, all the MTV stuff. This is really where WWF really took off. I think the build-up to the first WrestleMania might be the most important moment or most important time in WWF history, because it really shaped the future of the company and everything that would follow after that, and how WWF came into American pop culture and was integrated into it during the first WrestleMania, and the build-up to it, and of course the show itself. And now we see Mean Gene singing the national anthem at the first WrestleMania. It was the first ever person to sing the national anthem at a WrestleMania. What happened there was someone didn't show up to sing the national anthem, and they basically just had Mean Gene fill in. You can tell there was no intention to have him sing the national anthem, judging by his performance. They're showing a montage of Mean Gene with the Macho Man Randy Savage, and they even show him guiding Savage through a promo for WrestleMania 5, in which he just completely tells Savage all his lines, and Savage delivers her perfectly. And that's really, that shows you how great Mean Gene was. He made everyone better. That includes Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, anybody. They show him backstage with so many of the legends. Roddy Piper's another one he was great with. They even show him doing the Dusty Rhodes dance with the polka dots, which is still such an idiot's WWE. Where, I mean, they knew what they were doing, just putting Dusty Rhodes on polka dots. But they show Mean Gene doing all the comedy stuff with George the Animal Steele, all the stuff with Bobby Heenan's great, Jesse Ventura, Ultimate Warrior, and the Road Warriors. They showed that. The guy was great. Some might complain that he might have overshadowed the wrestlers and make it about himself too much, but I think he added to their gimmicks. I like some of the stuff at Macho Man. They show Elizabeth, and my God, Miss Elizabeth was gorgeous back in the day. Jesus Christ. They have to put her in the Hall of Fame too. I'm sad, she's not in there. I know why with her death and everything, but she needs to go in. First Lady of Wrestling. The stuff with him and the Mega Powers, that stuff was actually golden back then. Mean Gene was great. And he really, he was a part of the whole storyline. Not necessarily like he had a role in it, the whole storyline, almost all of it plays out with Mean Gene interviews. And I think you can make the argument Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage is probably the greatest built-up rivalry in WWE history. I think that's hard to argue. The way they built it up for WrestleMania 5 and they started all the year before WrestleMania 4. They're showing some of his great bloopers, including the classic "Put that cigarette out," and then the one is when the screen behind him falls down and he just starts cussing out the production people, which is really funny. Stuff with pies and faces and the gobbledygooker and stuff like that. So he talks about when he leaves WWE in '93. They show the stuff at WrestleMania 9 when he's dressed up during that whole Roman Coliseum theme in Las Vegas. He says he wasn't challenged, but it was just probably more about contracts, and WCW offered him a lot more money, and WWF probably didn't think it was worth to match it, and that's when he leaves to go to WCW in '93. So he was great in WCW. He did a lot for them like he did with WWF. A lot of work backstage and a lot of production meeting, working in creative, and there was also so much extras and videos he would shoot. And his most memorable part in WCW is when the whole ring is being trashed, when he's in there with the NWO, and he even gets hit in the nose with a beer bottle that someone didn't even drink. That was just a memorable moment. One of the most memorable parts in WCW was Ric Flair and the way he'd say his name. He'd say, "Mean, my God, Gene," which was always great. That was always one of the best parts of Nitro. They even have an interview with Charlotte, and she talked about how she always knew Gene and how he would always interact with her father. Then, once WCW goes out of business, he makes his return to the WWF at WrestleMania 17 in Houston, Texas, in the Astrodome, where he, alongside Bobby Heenan, did guest commentary for the Gimmick Battle Royal, which was a horrible match, the worst part of probably the greatest WrestleMania of all time. But it was still memorable, and still one of my favorite lines in the history of wrestling is on that show, Bobby Heenan, he says, as the Iron Sheik's making his way down the ring, it'll be WrestleMania 37 by the time the Iron Sheik makes his way down to the ring. I really wish in, 2 years at WrestleMania 37, WWE actually has the Iron Sheik walk down to the ring, and they can even show the clip of Bobby Heenan. God, that would just be great. Hopefully Sheik's still alive by then. They show that part when one of the Bushwhackers licks Mean Gene. That was always horrible. And that was that's the best WrestleMania of all time. That was actually really cool seeing him look back on that show. They even said the only reason the Iron Sheik had to win because he was the only guy who couldn't take a bump out of the ring. They never talk about this because they would probably want this buried, but WWE used to do this thing called WWE Confidential, which I used to watch every time. When I was a kid, I'd watch that show all the time. Every time it was on, I would always watch it, and Mean Gene would host it. It was a pretty controversial show. The one thing, looking back, that was really controversial was when they did the whole thing on Lex Luger, when the stuff with Miss Elizabeth. They almost made it like Luger killed her. They did a lot of... it was pretty controversial. They did, of course, the Montreal Screwjob. I remember really liking that show a lot. Every time it was on, I'd watch it. They, of course, canceled it, and then now they talk about, he says it's his greatest honor was being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2004. Oh, I'm sorry, I think it was 2006 he was inducted, because Hogan was the one who inducted him in 2006. I remember that now. Yeah, he did a great job. He even did a spot on the WrestleMania 22 the next night with Randy Orton, I believe. Everyone really liked Gene. They're all putting him over Triple H, Michael Cole. And they even show the spot at WrestleMania 30, which I completely forgot, because I think that was right after the Undertaker streak ended, so the crowd was dead. But it's Mean Gene doing the backstage interview with Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, and they're shaking hands with Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and the whole WrestleMania 1 main event reunion, which was a great segment. Even the problem was right after the Undertaker streak ended, so the whole crowd was down at the time. They show the stuff at WrestleMania 20 with Moolah and Mae Young with Mean Gene and Bobby. That segment sucked. They show Legends host and some of the highlights. Man, I didn't watch that. I heard it was horrible, but I never really I was never interested in seeing that. But it's really depressing to look back because Mean Gene's gone and Roddy Piper are both gone. So they get to when he passes away, and they show a whole bunch of the tweets from Vince McMahon, Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, Ric Flair, Triple H, The Rock, and they even show an ESPN piece at Part of the Interruption where they both paid tribute to him, Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser. Then they go to Monday Night Raw, in which Hulk Hogan paid tribute to Mean Gene, and they show the segment. It ends with the Hogan tribute and then a tribute video to Mean Gene, which was a great tribute. So I thought it was great. It ends with the Hall of Fame speech, and then they show in the interview he did, he says, wrestling's been great to me, and he says good life. So that was definitely a great way for the special to end. Again, really sad to, whenever they have someone die and they do something like this, it's very sad to watch. But, this guy was a really upbeat guy, legend, greatest interview of all time. Without question, just an icon in the WWE. And, again, rest in peace to me, Gene Okerlund. And he will be missed.